What, what, what's up in the his house? It's me, host Eric, and along with Kimberly. How you doing, Kim? I'm doing fine. That's super good to hear. I'm double live streaming. Double live streaming. Oh, I moved it.
Grab it.
I moved it. I try not to touch the screen when I grab it, you know? I'm live streaming today about the topic which the main reason I'm having this conversation here about this topic is because Kimberly said the expression yanking my chain. Indeed.
Doesn't look like you're in there.
Well, yeah. It's because the hair is a lot different. So, anyway, yeah. She's got a certain angle she wants her pictures to be taken at. Oh, and now that looks like her. That totally looks like her. I don't like that pose. I don't like it. So right now we're talking about this. There's a waitress at this restaurant nearby. It turns out that it's the granddaughter of one of her clients. She found out yesterday. That's not the topic of the video, though. But it was the topic of our conversation. So what I want to talk to you about today is intellectualism, science, psychology, personality theory, and the confluence of those matters. If you'd like to join me to discuss these things and or ask any questions or anything like that, I'm here in appear.in/CWFP2. We are concurrently live streaming to the main channel and to the raw channel. So I am attempting to switch from smoking to vaping today. And I just try to do it all at once. Like, I'm not going to taper down the cigarettes. Just not going to buy any more cigarettes. And I'm just going to try to vape. One could construe such an event in a lot of different ways. But most people would say most people would have some sort of response to that announcement that I just made, that I'm going to quote unquote quit smoking. Although, I mean, I don't plan on not ever smoking any cigarettes. I don't plan on buying cigarettes, and I could see myself bumming a cigarette off somebody or whatever. Hi, Susie.
Are you recording something?
I'm live streaming a video right now about intellectualism, psychology, science, and personality theory. That's the title of it. And I was explaining that I decided today that I'm going to not buy any cigarettes. I'm just going to vape. And I try to just switch today and going forward. But so having made that announcement, what do you think about that?
That's good.
Okay, thank you. But what I mean is, why is it good? Why do you say do you think is good?
It's cheaper and better for you.
Okay, so
And much easier than cooking.
right, all those three things are exactly why except I'm not really care about the better for you part, although I guess I do, but it's not the primary motivation for me. It's cheaper, practical motivation. It's important because cigarettes now are $10 a pack here in California. So it's just too much. It's just too goddamn much. So that's the primary reason for me. However, the third reason is not exactly a reason to switch, but it's, I mean, what would you call that? The third one, saying, okay, well, it's easier than quitting. So, well, it's a,
Convenience,
yeah. Well, it's just like,
maybe? A replacement.
yeah, it's a replacement. It's it's a solution to the it's a solution to the money problem aspect of it, and it is also a solution to the, or somewhat of a solution to the long problem aspect of it. But it's not a solution to the addiction aspect of it, because I don't view the addiction aspect of it a problem. Like, if cigarettes were cheap, I'd just keep smoking cigarettes.
Well, and
They are not. So anyway,
the second time you get inside of it, let me get them for you. You don't care what it is.
right. So when we're talking about things like intellectualism and such, science, psychology, personality theory, we're talking about why people do things, and or why non-living agents interact the way they do. So chemistry will tell us that if you mix this stuff and that stuff together, it'll start to fizzle for some reason. It's a reliably it's reliable enough that you can predict the outcomes at near 100% certainty if you can control the amount of variables in the equation with sufficient vigor. Because of that fact, people have
What is
missed.
it related to?
Let me see what he said. I don't know who that is. You said that. You told me who it was, but I don't. Is he here?
No, it's not here, it's on YouTube.
Oh,
And it says this section.
he. Okay, then I will. I'll talk to him. He's getting a super cheap typing session. I decided to do this little like Easter egg thing and see what would happen. And I put one up there for like $5, I think it was. I spent like 2 hours with you for $5, and nobody bought one for a long ass time. Somebody finally said, "Okay, I got to change that now. I got to make double the price. It'll be $10 next time, and then I got to double it again. It'll be $20. You go like that. So if you want to get a typing session from me, you should probably jump on it, because eventually, I don't really like overcommitting my time. So I only have a limited amount of typing sessions in me. Yeah. So anyway, the point is, Garrett Huntley, I will talk to you, or you can, if you can. What would be the best thing to do is to Facebook message me, be my Facebook friend, and Facebook message me and talk like that. I'm Eric Strauss, Temple City, is what I said. I haven't changed my Facebook city because I don't want to. And that's not really. But anyway, I'll figure that out. I'll look at the order and everything, and I'll get in contact with you if you don't get in contact with me first. If you have my phone number, you can call me, and we'll set up a time and all that kind of stuff. Anywho, if you don't have my phone number, it's 909-720-2261. I think so. I think it's that. It might be 2251. All right. Anyway, intellectualism. So the thing that made me put this in there is Corey's little dig that he attempted in his message to me, where he said, uh, he sent me a link to these podcaster type people who are talking on YouTube. It's like a YouTube podcast, I guess, and referred to them as genuine intellectuals and indicated that TWFP should be more like them. So implicitly, one can infer anyway that that the kind of talk going on around here is not genuine intellectualism, but pseudo intellectualism or artificial intellectualism or something, or non intellectualism. So, first of all, I think the term is kind of silly, intellectual versus non intellectual, because basically it's used interchangeably with a lot of other terms to mean generally intuitive versus generally sensory. There's nothing inherently superior about ideation over experiencing life in through other modalities. But I do agree that there are lots of different circumstances in life, and that each of those circumstances requires one to engineer an optimized means of interaction that may prioritize certain aspects of existentiality over others. I think probably what Corey doesn't like about this channel, in part, or what he's trying to get at, is he sees it as too married to one means of understanding. And I get that critique periodically from people, that, Eric, you need to broaden your perspective and understand things through other nomenclatures than those of MBTI and socionics and stuff. The reality of the world is more complicated than just no, get away. Goddamn flies. Kimberly. Oh my god, this is Kimberly loves to do this. It doesn't matter how much I talk to her about it and point out that it's crazy. She loves to do this. The cats control her mind. She is their bitch. There's no doubt about it. The cats will. I fed the cats the bowl of cat food in the kitchen. Okay, there's tuna on. I fed the tuna in the kitchen. They're all fine, but what they do is they come mill around Kimberly, and they're talking to each other. They're saying, "Let's see what we can make her do next." And she goes, "Well, what do you guys want? What do you need? What you're looking at me expectantly. Here, let me bring a plate of fly gathering material right here on the porch so that we can have all the flies come here." And the cats will each they'll nibble like 3 bites of the food, and they're like, "We're already full, but haha, she did it again." And and then I look over. One second it was fine. Next second I look over, and there is an army of flies. No, please, Kimberly. Please, can we not put cat food on the porch? How there? Well, what happened is she's probably concerned that they might have to walk too far to the kitchen to eat it. Is that what the problem is?
Maybe she doesn't have the cats in the house.
Okay, well, the thing is, we have doors on this house and windows. So, by closing those, we manage to keep the flies out regardless of whether the cat food is in the house. Okay, so enough about that. That's not what we're talking about. Um, well, can't you just put it down there, though? Anyway, intellectualism is not what I'm displaying right now. I'm displaying domesticism or cat fancy. Oh, No, he's an INFJ. Corey. Yeah, and what he really doesn't care for is it's an FE thing, you know. It's not really about the content at all. So, but somebody might very well. It's one of the first attacks people are going to go to if they want to attack for any reason, legitimate or otherwise, is that the channel is too narrow in its frame of reference. Now, I would say that's absolutely not the case. That it's that narrow in its frame of reference. That I approach things through a lot of different frames of reference. But I would also concede that most of the videos are about cognitive functions and personality typing. The reason is because it's where I found an audience. You know, it's just maybe if I had been doing a podcast or something like those guys were doing, or I was having a conversation with a podcasting partner, and we had some list of topics we wanted to go through or something, it would have played out like that. But the fact is, the analysis that I found myself doing was first and foremost about my own life, as it continues to be, in an SI frame of reference for me. That's how it works. It's like the reason I want to know a lot about ENTPs was because I wanted to understand myself and I wanted to ideate. I just wanted to be me. To be me means to ideate a lot, to come up with a lot of talking about random shit and drawing links to stuff between things and come up with possibilities. So the 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 type of things I talked about and the type of what I hope would be insight or um, cognitive tools is that as well. It's like when the purpose of this kind of stuff, of talking about this stuff, of talking about cognition, of talking about human experience, of talking about philosophy or psychology, the purpose of it is to provide an individual with the capacity to identify, embrace, shed, uh, prioritize, evangelate, proselytize, or whatever, those narratives that are most optimal aspects of yourself, and to deprioritize those narratives that are least optimal to yourself. Such that, let's say, you begin life with being exposed to a certain set of negative narratives that is ontologically violent, whether it be a narrative that says you can't succeed at this because you're a girl, and in this family girls have to be like this, or whether it says you can't, you are wrong or bad because you are not consistent with my expectations of who you should be as part of a group, or that I mean, it happens in all sorts. It happens in all different manner of display. So there's certain ontological violence associated with ADHD, where people will say, "You're too much," and "Oh my God, just Eric, you're just too much. Just you go into a room, you suck all the air out of it." It's not necessarily, they're not necessarily being mean or dishonest or trying to harm me or somebody to whom they might say that. They are noting that there's a genuine FE level problem, probably, and maybe reacting naturally to that. But regardless, it's an expression of clashing identities, not of something else. So, it is very possible to talk about world affairs, talk about stuff like Bitcoin, talk about cryptocurrencies and the impact that they're going to have on markets, to talk about the ways in which individual human beings are interacting differently now to produce, manifest a different societal structure over time. It certainly is possible to talk about control mechanisms and how those who use control mechanisms abuse those control mechanisms. It's possible to talk about manipulation of populations and stuff like that, which is, I suppose, what Corey probably would prefer I discuss. Probably Kestrel would too, as another INFJ. Um, like Kestrel, Corey is somebody who has firm conclusions in his head about why things happen and has the tendency to attribute um, situations, outcomes, status quos to groups of motivated individuals acting out those motivations. So anyway, um, it's certainly possible to talk about that in an intellectually stimulating fashion. However, for me, that would necessarily be critiquing the modality of understanding and discussion, which would subsume, of course, in terms of importance, any contention level discussion about it. In other words, okay, you might be correct about your interpretation of the status quo as being a manifestation of these factors, these elements that are motivationally based in human behavior, because of course there's humans who we're talking about, so we can't divorce their action from human behavior, that they're motivationally based, and you can come up with all this, like, and this is my case, this is my position is, what are those, puppies? We're not getting a dog. But I would have to discuss it from a position of, okay, so why is it that you are drawing these conclusions so powerfully, given the fact that here are some alternate explanations, and then they'll say, well, but they seem like alternate explanations because you're not looking at the picture holistically. You're not saying, if you look at, okay, well, oh yeah, well, that one might be a coincidence, and that one might be, but if you look at the whole big picture, and what's the one thread that runs through the whole thing is these motivational concerns. It's very easy for INFJs to get lost in that kind of thinking. So it's not correct because they don't understand the way that chaotic systems work. They can't. They never will. They never will because they have an objective epistemology. In other words, their knowledge about how the world is scarily similar to the way it actually is. So much so that they don't understand the limitations of their map and mistake it for the territory on an ongoing basis. And that's why it's so, for me to talk intellectually about that sort of topic, I mean, certainly I can talk about Bitcoin and things like that as being cryptocurrencies are, in fact, the engine of liberation for humanity. Because once the government can't access your financial behaviors, they can no longer have justifiable protocols of stealing. So in other words, they have to come up with some, like, here is the protocol of stealing that we use, because otherwise it's just haphazard stealing. So they have to have some sort of protocol to steal shit from people to be a government. Otherwise, it's just criminals. And cryptocurrency denies them that avenue of control. Already, all smart investors have some percentage of their portfolio in cryptocurrency because it's tax-free. Nobody thinks that they're going to report cryptocurrency capital gains because it's the right thing to do. Nobody. I mean, zero people. Zero people do that. That's why financial advisors are saying to, smart, wealthy investors and stuff, it's a good idea to put 20% of your money into cryptocurrencies because they're tax-free and blah, blah. But they're not tax-free. You don't have to report it. And, oh gosh, I thought it was a good thing to pay your taxes. Why are there zero people reporting it? Because nobody thinks it's a good thing to pay taxes. Nobody actually thinks that. And with good reason. They say that. They say it for sure. But give them a chance to avoid paying taxes, they will avoid paying them. And that's not true of helping my daughter out with some pocket money or whatever. If I give her some cash, I could avoid that. I don't avoid it anyway because I love her and she's important and she matters. Right? Unlike people who take your money with various justifications that are just nonsense for. Anyway, that's not the point. I could spend all day talking about that shit. It would be a node of less significance than what talking about that shit means and how we talk about it. How we talk about that shit is of vastly greater significance than talking about that shit. And it always will be. Because the thing is, whereas Corey is stuck within his frame of reference, if we talk enough about it, if we understand the way that discourse works, if we understand that what he views as a correct or incorrect interpretation of reality, I understand to be all of those interpretations are discursive processes in process. And they are fundamentally discursive in purpose, in nature, and in expression. They are not definitional. They are not descriptive like that. They don't reference the physical world in a meaningful way. They are discursive events only. So, for example, if you were to think to yourself, as I do, that 9/11 was a conspiracy, what I have to remember all the time is that's a discursive event only. What I'm pointing out there is that we should negate we should negate the status quo discourse regarding media objects that we all experienced if we were alive then, either for ourselves or can reference through archival means. Media objects that are existent. Okay, so there are existent media objects, and in those existent media objects, there's a meta narrative that explains those media objects. And in fact, this is what an INFJ will think about this. There's a meta narrative that explains those media objects, and that's the narrative that we need to understand and attack and get to the point. This is a lie. In fact, there are a multiplicity of narratives and meta narratives from alternate positions on the discursive spectrum there. Some of them are sourced from single groups. Some of them are sourced from single individuals. Some of them are sourced from multiple groups with overlapping interests. Some of them are sourced, and the need for the INFJ is strong to understand there being a holistic, systemic engine to things. There's not, because it's a chaotic system, and most shit that happens are emergent functionalities. But I understand why they need it to be that, because even though I don't need it to be that, because I have SI as a subjective epistemology, I operate as though things were that way in terms of my discursive approaches often enough, because I'm objective in my discourse. So this is a critical failure of humanity is to mistake as a species. We consistently mistake our objective approximations for being as significant, more significant, or determinate in ways that they're not. Uh, Science, for example, is the quintessential example. I went to the supermarket. Hello, new person. How are you? Do you want to say something? I'm on a roll here. I'm on one of my Eric like monologues here. Okay. Yeah, hide that hideous visage of yours. Okay. Um. All right. So I went to the store the other day. There was a magazine in the store that said, uh, "Your Personality," and it was a I forget what the magazine was, like National Geographic or something, and it went through all different ways of framing personality and stuff, and it didn't include any cognitive function stuff. So here's the thing about that. One of the reasons it didn't include it is because the jury's still out in a lot of people's minds as to whether this is science or pseudoscience. Well, it's neither science nor pseudoscience, and none of the other personality shit you have in there is science either, to the extent that you think science is significantly different than anything else. The point is, they're talking about big five personality traits, and they say, well, you can prove these ones because we have good data from studies and statistics and stuff like this. Okay, well, first of all, personality qualities in people, there's no all you're going to do is find relative correlations within individuals. You're never going to find some sort of they'd like it to be locked down to a physical world reference point that allows them to falsify results in the way that one normally does through science. But results of the sort that they're looking at don't work that way because human cognition is not a closed system. In other words, I can be aware of what where the analysis being done on my own personality and thinking, and the analysis being done on my own personality and thinking can change both my personality, my thinking, and the analysis being done about my personality and thinking. So it's an entirely open system. And as a consequence, you cannot ever get human personality pinned down in a way that's going to be falsifiable over time because as soon as something gets established as necessarily so, humans metacognate their way out of it. So, what's the takeaway from this? If you want to take science seriously, understand it for what it is. Science, quote unquote, is a way of working with variables that allows a higher certainty of prediction than does than do other modalities of working with variables because it tries to eliminate non-physical world variables such that the apparent causal nature of physical reality can be advantageously harnessed a into little prediction app algorithms that we consider like science processes. Like, for example, if I want to protect this wood porch from water damage, I might apply Thompson's water seal to it. But what is Thompson's water seal? That's science having noted out a process of predictability. In other words, if we mix these things together, it makes this goo. When you put this goo on wood, then you let it sit there for a while to dry out, and then you put water on it. The water beads up and it doesn't sink into the wood. The wood won't absorb any of the water. Science has said, I want to figure out a way that I can, with a high accuracy of prediction, know that a piece of wood will not soak in water. To make a piece of wood so that it will not soak in water with a high degree of prediction. Of course, the fact that the reason it's highly predictable is because conditions on number one, conditions on Earth stay within a given range of spectrum. So it's like, it never gets okay. Well, yeah, it does protect against water because water is is never hitting the wood in a highly super high temperature steam being shot at it at 7,000 miles an hour. If it were, then the water would get into the wood, and your prediction is shit. But on Earth, it never gets that way, so your prediction is good because the environment in which we actually physically live has um, has limits of the range in which shit happens. The wind blows here sometimes really really fast, but it never blows 10,000 miles an hour, right? And it does get really hot here in LA, but it never gets 500 degrees. So um, because of that, we can predict shit on Earth in the physical world that seems as though we can know we can know the physical world causally, and then what has happened? Humanity has a falsification fetish. That's what's happened. Humanity has a falsification fetish. In reality, validation is significantly more important than falsification. And if we are determined to be firm and set in conclusions and and say that our determinedness to be set and firm in our conclusions is going to be driven by falsification, then we are doing the species and ourselves a great disservice because we're being stupid. The fact is, falsification is a way to prove a node of something. That's it. The frame is never going to be falsifiable. The frame is always going to be understood as valid or invalid at best, as preferable or not preferable. If you want to have any kind of meaningful interaction with humanity's store of knowledge, wisdom, and intellectual capacity, then it requires you to be node sensitive. That is to say, to spend as little intellectual time within nodes as possible, and spend as much intellectual time as possible analyzing the nature of nodes and how people link nodes between one another into frameworks. Then this is the sort of thing that is difficult to attack, right? Because you can't prove I'm wrong because I'm not talking about your thing. I'm talking about why you're presenting your thing and why you are trying to prove me wrong and what those things mean. Not motivationally why. I don't give a fuck if you're projecting or whatever. Saying rhetorically why, discursively why, what it means to use those words. Everybody keeps thinking that science excludes the words from shit. It's like, well, here's some numbers, so it's fine. No, the words are the only thing that matter. And understanding that the words are the only thing that matters is the other only thing that matters. But yes, that's true what I just said, all that stuff. But if you missed some of those gold bricks, that's why God invented the rewind button. We know that God invented the rewind button because nobody else would be all powerful enough to think, hey, let's go backwards in time. And that's how you know that God exists, because we have rewind buttons. Right, Susie?
That makes no sense.
Doesn't it, though? Doesn't it?
But everything which uses spells doesn't make any sense anyway, so it makes sense.
It's true. Everything that uses God as a reason doesn't really make sense, provided you are looking for the reason to provide you information about how something came to be. Well, you see, I just did what I was talking about. I just demonstrated what I was talking about. So you could argue about, if I say, well, the reason that dolphins are shaped the way they are is because God made them that way. We could argue about that directly. This is a good thing. We could argue contention level first. We could argue No, it's because they evolved that way. No, it's because God made them that way. We could have that argument, and or we could have the argument that says, um, hold on a second, Kim. I have to chase this thought down. Or we could say, let's argue about whether it's a good idea to ask the question of why is a dolphin shaped that way, or what are we trying to what are we going to do with that answer? What does it mean to say why is a dolphin shaped that way? Or does it mean how did the dolphin come to be shaped that way? Well, this one was born and grew up and now it's shaped that way. Oh, you mean the dolphin in the abstract? How did the dolphin, the grand dolphin of the sky, come to be that shape? Yes. Or we can have an argument about whether it's a good idea to have that argument, whether it's a good idea to have that argument based on history, whether it's a good idea to have that argument morally, whether it's a good idea to have that argument practically, whether we ought to use our time differently because of some sort of opportunity cost, whether we engage in something that furthers the overall good cause of discourse or harms discourse in whole because of our reductive quality of our language or whatever. All of those words are way more important than science. Everyone can agree on that. Everybody agrees with that. I said all of those words are more important than science, which is other words. Because science is a node of my words. Science is a subset of my look. My shit's the framework for science, not the other way around.
You make up words that that's what truths are made.
I don't make up words, and I don't make truths.
Okay, you make up meanings of words.
Look, there's no way to express yourself in words without making statements. And there's no way to make statements without playing with truth values. In other words, every statement has a truth value, true, false, or no truth value. So, as a consequence, one can establish that truths, falsehoods, and statements with no truth value interact with one another in ways that produce different understandings in different peoples. To insist that data-driven justifications for conclusions be prioritized is to misunderstand and to fail to recognize that falsification is one of the tools that one can use in establishing that the legitimacy of something which ought necessarily be established by a validation, not falsification. Now that's some real intellectualism right there. It's understanding it from the topmost level. No. No, it's to point out that you can only really attain relative absolutes. You can't really attain absolute absolutes, and science is no different than anything else in that regard, except that science has a better ability to control variables because it operates in a physical world that is constrained in its scope, whereas our metaphysical worlds are not constrained in their scopes, and our ability to use language to parse your way out of any trap you might have gotten yourself into is ultimately predominant and wins against the much less significant ability to have a slightly higher predictability result through falsification because of the why is that significant? I'm not saying it's less significant. I'm saying that that by and large the apparent advantages in predictability that science offer are illusory and or related to the nature of space objects and or related to the nature of our limited range of experience here, physical experience here on Earth, and they're not actually what they appear to be, which is, well, this is more real and solid because it's causal, whereas this other shit you're talking about, Eric, is conditional. It's as relatively absolute as anything else. It's just relatively absolute over a different kind of relationship with time, so that you can't go forwards and backwards in time. You can't, as a consequence, you can't do and then undo without it actually happening. It's the instantiation of shit that gives science its predictability. It's not the primacy of falsification as a modality.
Well, what can be? But what can be though? You see, science thinks they can. Science thinks they can do that shit. They're not actually doing what it appears they're doing. That's what I'm saying. It's not a belief. A belief would be something that one ascribes to consistently over time. Uh, I don't really ascribe to this consistently over time, although I would say I affirm it. I've affirmed it multiple times on multiple occasions.
So science isn't fact.
Well, people use the word science to refer to the scientific method, the process by which you check your hypothesis, right? So, like, if I want to test if this pill makes you go to sleep or makes you stay awake, I I could test it easily enough by taking three of them.
Right.
Do I crash out or do I stay awake? That's not falsifying any conclusion I might have on it. So if I say to you, "Hey, Kim, these pills will make you stay awake," and you can check science and see what the science says about whether it makes you stay awake. You can trust me and see, or ultimately, none of those things matter. If you take them and they make you go to sleep, science is wrong, and I was wrong too. Thanks to science. Then, then science. Okay, see that's the point though. Science says, well, I am better than other modalities because I am all about scrutiny. And in other words, there are no holy cows in science. Everybody's going after every conclusion to try to disprove it, to try to make the new science, right? Well, that's wonderful. Look,
I
yep,
think people look at it as fact.
okay. Well, okay. Now let's get to that. First, let me get to the first thing that Homie said there, which was that the science doesn't say anything that some scientists may say, blah, blah, blah. You're right. Science says nothing. It's a reification fallacy. And I don't care what scientists say. I'm saying what I should have said is this. When people refer to science in argumentation and talk about the primacy of science over other modalities, what they mean when they say science in that instance is they're referring to the evidentiary process, perhaps, like Susie's getting at, or the data gathering process, or the data itself, or the fact that this data was gathered fairly, or that this test was performed fairly, or something like that. All right, so the thing to note about that is that's exactly what science is, to the extent that it's useful. It's evidence in a discursive event. Science does never exist in a vacuum. You will never find data that is not linked to an individual's intentionality. You can, by means of a process called double blind, you can pretty reliably make it so that the individual's intentionality doesn't color their execution of the process, but you can just as reliably do that by being hyper aware, if you're the scientist yourself, of your own biases and accounting for them in your metacognitive processes. In fact, it's a much preferable means to do it than double blind because I'd rather acknowledge the role of the individual person. What science tries to do is to eliminate the observer from the process and say these things happen as though there were no observer present. However, all instantiation of any aspect of existence predicates upon observation foremost. And without the observer, no existence can happen. So while it is true that we can approximate well into objects, existent things, as though they existed outside of being observed in given instances, that is fundamentally not, it is fundamentally itself a sketch of the reality. So what happens when people get attached to ideas or attached to certain sets of words, believe these words are true and those words are not true, and argues passionately for things. When people get attached in that fashion, what's happening there is they don't understand that the map is not the territory, that the words we use, these objects that we approximate, vectors, impacts, little nodes within a chaotic system that are predictable within limits because of because it's always more chaotic than it seems. It's always more open than it seems. But within nodes, we can treat nodes them as though they were closed systems and have predictability both on a discursive level and on a physical level about equivalently. So, no, science doesn't really have any advantage except it's good for producing time objects, that is to say, approximations that we can both agree have legitimacy because they were produced fairly. That's it. Well, the thing is, quantum mechanics is a way of using the the interplay of things within the physical world to prove what philosophy already knew a long time ago, which is if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? The answer is contradictory premises. Trees never fall in the forest, and we know about them, but for their have been being observed. In other words, if a tree falls in the forest, okay, so what you really are saying, if you say if a tree falls in the forest, is you're saying if a tree falls in the forest and we know about it somehow, because otherwise there's no tree falling in the forest. We have to know about it. To know about it, it has to have been observed in some fashion or another. Now we can. Go ahead. I'm explaining it to you right now. I'm telling you, yes, we can all understand that quantum mechanics exists based on this reality. Okay, Kestrel, but look, you don't understand what it is that is being claimed to have been seen, and let me try to explain that, okay? The reality is, obviously it is necessarily so that observations follow from the observer. In other words, it cannot possibly be the case that that instantiation means to create an instance of something or for an instance to happen, all right? And obviously instantiation implies existentiality. So if there's an instance of something, then that something exists. With the tree falls in the forest point, what we realize is if you set up something such that what is observed is delayed somehow, then you set up you delay what is. Necessarily it's the case that existentiality is delayed until after instantiation. Okay, so existentiality follows from instantiation, not the other way around. That's the mistake. People think, well, to be an instance, it must exist. No, you must have to exist. You must instantiate. And so, in other words, all quantum mechanics experiments tell us, and it makes perfect sense that they would actually be this if they did see it or not. All it tells us is that we don't get to know the actual thing until we observe it. Of course. Well, here's the thing. There is no aspect of existence that is not within you, as far as you can tell. There's nothing you know that anybody else knows. Like, so you know. Well, but here's the thing. Existence beyond you is a meaningless concept, except insofar as it is likely that others have wholly contained universes within them as whole and as contained as your own. So it's, for example, we think of ourselves as existing concurrently within a single world and a single reality. It's more likely that we are each rendering reality separately on our own computer, so to speak. It's like when you go play in World of Warcraft online, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, then you enter. You guys are sharing a simulated environment, but that it's not like your computer is sending your character to a central computer, and their computer is sending their character to a central computer where those characters are interacting in a single environment, which then gets beamed back to your computers. It doesn't work like that at all. It's you're rendering the environment independently on the computer. The computers are talking to each other about where they are in their respective renderings of the environment, so that there's a vague equivalency between the environments you see on each other's computer. But it's not even, you guys don't see the same things on each computer, because you're viewing that world from a different perspective and you're rendering it independently. Same thing is likely true of this reality that we're in right now. It may seem that Kimberly and I are both in the same space here on the same porch, but most likely we're both rendering the porch separately at the same time concurrently, and it just feels that way. Now, if it is a single reality, that would be a good proof for the existence of God, because necessarily existentiality, remember, follows instantiation, and to instantiate must be observed. So if, in fact, like somewhere out in the deeps of space, there's parts of space that exist, even though they're not actually being observed as far as we know by anybody, and if there is, in fact, something existent that is not being observed and never been observed, then there must be God, because we know already that existentiality, observation precedes existentiality. So that we can just call that observer God, if we are in a single reality. Now, that argument breaks down immediately if you say, but we're not necessarily in a single reality. We're more likely rendering, each of us rendering our reality independently and concurrently, as per our own ontological process. That's what ontology is: the manifestation of a reality and a universe through a single moral agent that is both actor and processor and object. So let me see what the title of this live stream was again, so I can get back to topic a little bit, if I would have got off topic. Oh yeah, I'm on topic. Oh, the rest of the audio is almost inaudible. Oh, that's my bad. Let me fix that. It's because you're getting it through the speakers, not through the Mia. Not through the Mia, you say, Eric? No, yeah, you're not getting it through the Mia, and that's the problem. If you don't get it through the Mia, then you'll get it up your ass. It's either Mia or ass. Those are your only two choices.
Eric, do you see the thing in chat?
Chat. What am I seeing? I don't know.
A link to something. Diagram.
A link to something diagram. Okay. Science sure beats anecdote as a means of determining validity. Science is not a means of determining validity, though. Science is a means of determining the status of falsification.
There is no validity, but it is the most consistent narrative available. And some people.
No, there absolutely is validity. It's distinct from truth. So, for example, I can say, if all pigs sing opera, and this cup is a pig, then this cup sings opera, is
right. But
valid.
that depends on. Doesn't that depend on premises, which are?
It's a grammar thing. No, validity is an emergent function of grammar. That is to say, because the nature of language is objective, it excludes we understand things through negative what they are not. Language allows for the law of non-contradiction and conditionality, because objects are defined by what they are not. In other words, if this is not something, then you can eliminate that thing from possibility. And therefore, the grammar, because you get objects that have binary statuses like that, rather than sliding scale, spectrums that you fall somewhere along with no clear bright lines, language allows us to have bright lines and binaries, and therefore validity can be determined as relatively absolute. It's relatively absolute, which means the grammar of it is absolutely correct, but the specific nodes within the grammar we'll never really know anything about. They're just there to be objective representations of things. It will 100% be true that if A then B and A then B, but what A and B are, we won't necessarily agree about at any given point. We won't necessarily agree what A means and what B means, even if we're using the same words. So the only thing we can determine with 100% certainty is validity. We can never determine soundness with 100% certainty, because soundness means valid and true.
Soundness means valid and true, but we can have validity.
We can have validity. We can have 100% relative certainty in validity. In other words, validity is a binary state. Something either is valid or it's invalid. But validity does not correlate strongly with truth at all. So
I see.
Yeah.
But I mean, is science not like valid, as you're saying?
Science isn't interested in validity. Now, here are some things that are interested in validity: computer programming. The reason we're able to talk right now by this app is because this app is valid. The logic of it works. If I push whatever at some level, all computer behaviors are conditional logic. If you go to a website and you click, oh, I want to look at that product, and you click it, it's gone through a if down push with your finger, then send this into a new tab, and it's all of those conditional logic webs. The other day I was at the restaurant, and I wanted to see how hard it would be to write a computer program for ordering a sandwich, because their menu had this weird sandwich setup. And so I started to do the conditional logic on it. And it was basically, the rule was this: it's a build your own sandwich. Okay, you get one meat. Well, you get lettuce. You get like the lettuce, tomato, and mayo, and mustard, and bread. Okay, you always get that, right? Now you also get, and it said choose. You choose one meat, but it also had to allow for the possibility that somebody doesn't want to get a meat. They want to get a veggie or something. So it's got 3 columns of things: meats, veggies, and bread. And your sandwich comes with bread to begin with, of a certain kind, and it comes with lettuce and tomato and mayo mustard. And you choose one of the things from the 3 columns below. It doesn't have to be the meat. It could be a veggie. But if you choose a bread, you're not choosing a thing. That would just change your bread. And you still get to choose another thing. And if you don't choose a meat, you could choose a veggie, and then if you do want to choose a veggie and a meat, then you have to add it all. Okay, so it's they set this thing up incredibly dumbly on the menu, so that I had to ask a question. And so I was like, okay, wait. Are you saying, because it didn't say it comes with the bread, it just said it comes with lettuce, tomato, mayo, and mustard, and it had bread as one of the things you could choose. So I said, are you telling me I have to choose a bread first, or and then I get a meat for free? Or I don't understand this crazy algorithm you got here. Well, God damn it.
So this is kind of like what? This is kind of like an out there objection, but like.
Hold that thought. I can't hear anything. It'll be a second. This guy's got to move.
Okay.
Fucking Laverne. Hey, boss, I got this extremely loud piece of power equipment. Where should I go? Head over to Laverne. They need more noise over there. All right, go ahead.
So this is coming from like way left field or whatever, but why why do we need mathematical proofs for scientific theories if it's not interested in validity? See, mathematical proof must be valid. It must
We
equate
don't
on
have
both
mathematical
sides.
proofs for scientific theories. That's not the case.
That's not.
No. We have, instead what we have is the weakest kind of evidence of all, which is we've got a bunch of experimental data.
Okay, but like Einstein's theory of relativity, when he came up with it, he had an idea and then he had to do the mathematical work to make it consistent.
The theory of relativity is one of those examples of something that's relatively absolute. It's true within its own, within the rules of its own system. It deals with objects, namely math, numbers, letters representing vectors and other things like that, and words as well, in order to say, here, according to the rules of this system, and according to, if we assign these meanings to these specific objects within the system, here's a model, or here's a notion that is so within this system that has heretofore not been known. It's like saying, it's like, it's very much like what Jung did with cognitive functions, except he's doing it with physical properties and the reality that we don't experience time in the physical world except in one direction, even if we don't experience it equivalently. Theory of relativity makes, you can logically deduce it. You don't have to know the math to understand that it necessarily must be the case.
Yeah, it doesn't unify with quantum mechanics and those
because
things.
They're relatively absolute. They're within their own system only.
But both systems are about our physical reality. And
Neither
what we
system
see
is
as
about it. Neither system is about it. Both of them are about trying to remove from the equation the observer. And in neither instance does it work. Theory of relativity says, because observers are always present, this is the way that time, light, and movement must interact. And quantum theory says, because observers are always necessary, here's what happens if you put a lot of energy into trying to falsify that the observer is present, trying to make the observer not present. You spend a lot of energy to it, then this weird shit gets observed. If you spend a lot of energy observing your own effort to not observe something, then weird shit happens. That's all quantum mechanics is. And it doesn't matter. Quantum mechanics doesn't matter because what causes things to supercollapse from a state of quantum uncertainty? Observation. What causes a state of quantum uncertainty to exist in the first place? The observation of it. There's nothing there. It's a philosopher's stone. You just sit there and muse upon it. Now, it is true that people can do remarkable things with ideation in ways that can create magical links to the physical world. But sometimes ideation that is pure and elegant enough will prompt in some other party engineering link, a way to go, oh, and I could actually use that idea and apply it to this other thing over here, or somehow make some equivalent. Like a YouTube video is the equivalent of a hammer. It's an object that exists for a given purpose that we've learned to make as an algorithm to allow us to node it off, to make it seem like it's not subject to the ever wispy and disappearingly solid realities of an eternally chaotic system of independently interacting moral agents and non-moral agents and objects and all the other shit that's in the world, right? That's we have mastered the ability to node shit off, to tie off a little loop. Like I'm gonna create a little clone of myself called the YouTube video that's got little clones of you guys in it too, and we're gonna put it on an eternal loop. It gets to live its life over and over and over and over again for the purpose of other people experience it living its life for their own purposes. And the accomplishment of that in the physical world is our ability to make a hammer. A hammer is first and foremost a concept. It's an idea that, hey, I bet if I had something that had like a heavy thing on the end of a stick, I could really knock that thing down a lot easier than with my hand, which keeps hurting when I try to hit it. It's a concept. And so it's a concept that is necessarily linked to an observer with an intention who has interests. So we can't experience existence through actual disinterest. We cannot remove from the equation subjective interest as science attempts to and have it be anything but an approximation. The reason is because nothing happens except through the application of an ontological process. In other words, my identity existing in the world means that stuff that I know and stuff that happens to me and stuff that I see happens and knows and happens to me and stuff. You might say, okay, but be objective, Eric. Well, you're either saying, but Eric, we're playing on this playing field, and the rules of this playing field don't allow that, which is fine. We're playing on this playing field, and the rules playing and that playing field don't allow what you're doing right now. That's fine. Or you're saying, my rules on my playing field must be applied in all circumstances, in which case, no. Or you're saying, we should pretend the approximations of reality are more real than reality itself, which no. Or we should misunderstand the nature of a discursive process as being one that's determinate in some sort of belief being true way rather than as instead a manifestation of ontologies interacting with one another. I will stop talking for a second.
So I kind of see it as questions arise for intentional observers, and science is just a method of answering these questions and testing people's answers to these questions to see how consistent, or I guess I don't really understand this point, like whether or not something can be consistent with reality, or like how consistent it can be. It can't be valid, I guess. It can't be ultimately valid, but I guess we can create a narrative where we reach further certainty, but that's ultimately based on the observer. So I'm not really sure.
Okay, well, I would begin addressing that by saying it's important to remember that the way that truth works. So there's a couple theories of truth. One theory, the original old theory of truth was truth bearer, truth carrier. In other words, words bear truth. Truth. What is it? Truth carrier, truth bearer, and truth. I don't know. One of them is the thing that carries it, and one of them is the thing you check against. So you go like, okay, well, reality, we check the truth of your statement against reality. If I say I have white letters on my shirt, then you can look at my shirt, and if they are in fact white, my sentence is true, and if they are a different color, then my sentence is false. That was the original old theory of truth. But a lot of people point out, well, that's not really very meaningful because most things people say are less cut and dry than that, and they're less absolutely linked to the physical world. And so they end up saying, well, really, it's a correspondence theory of truth, where truth is determined by consensus by a bunch of people. Like, well, because most people agree this is white. Well, these are white letters. Even if you perceive them otherwise, we'll call this true. Except people will point out, but there are good instances where most people believe things that simply aren't true, and we can verify that they aren't true because there's some piece of evidence there that's not changing. For example, you might have most people believe that going outside when it's cold outside means you're more likely to get sick because uh, the cold weather makes you sick. But cold weather doesn't actually make you sick, and here's some evidence or whatever. Now, in that instance, you say, well, so the correspondence theory of truth is not right because most people agree on this other thing, but it's not true. Okay, so, well, that theory is not true. It's not right. Well, here's the fact of the matter. What you need is a three-legged stool to understand truth. There is, in fact, a physical reference point at some place for many things, okay, that you can check against. There is also a definitional component to it that says definitions of words aren't absolute, but they are determined as what they are, what is not that, and people have a conventional way of using them. So, in other words, your usage of language is either normal and in agreement with most other people's usage of language, or it's not. And if it's not, then it's not for one of a variety of reasons, which has a variety of impacts on the truth. But the third leg that people don't consider a lot when talking about truth is that the question of truth never even comes up except except that it has been preceded by an individual person intending the language he produces to do something specific, probably, or to or to do something for him. In other words, I may be making this video because I expect my language to do something for me, which is to say, to make me enjoy this process of being listened to by people and having them ask questions or make comments or stuff like that. So that's my intentionality. Now, if I say to you, the letters on this sweatshirt are white, it's true because one, I'm intending it to be an example of something that's true. I wouldn't say this sentence normally. I wouldn't if I weren't talking about truth, I would never go up to you and say, "Hey, the letters on my shirt are white." You go, and you're also fucking an idiot. 1 + 1 does equal 2. You never say statements like that without an intention. So what we really have to check against for truth, usually when dealing with people, is not about its accuracy in comparison against a physical reality, but its manifestation as an expression of honesty or deception. And that has entirely to do with the intentionality of the individual making the statement. If I am honest, then I'm telling you something that's wrong, then I'm mistaken. But if I am deceiving you and I tell you something that's wrong, then I have lied. In either case, I might make a sentence that has a truth value of true within a given conversation, but later on we find out some new piece of information, and that switches to false. It doesn't retroactively make that conversation unhappen. It was still true for the duration of that conversation, for the purposes of that conversation, because every statement operates as a set of objects on the flow of a conversation.
Well, it was true in the honesty sense, but not in the other sense.
It was true in the sense that it functioned as an object in a conversation and was assumed to be true and functioned as a true object within that conversation. So let's say you and I had a talk about how it was rude of you not to go to Susie's party because you knew she really wanted you to go, blah, 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 blah. And we had this conversation for a long time. And then later on, we realized that Susie didn't actually have the party. It never went down. It fell apart. She got appendicitis that morning and had to go to the hospital. So it turned out it was not rude of you to skip a party. During that conversation, we ended up arguing back and forth, and you ended up agreeing with me that it was rude of you to skip that party, and you really should have, and you feel bad now, and you see that, and you knew that even then, but you were just being lazy, and fuck, you wish you regret it. It was true then, at that time, that it was rude of you to miss a party. Later on, we find out the party never happened. So it doesn't retroactively become false for that conversation. It's false now going forward for this conversation. But see, that's the problem. People think that truth is something that persists and is an attribute of the object rather than an attribute that is conversationally contingent. It is true for the purpose of this conversation that her party was canceled, so it wasn't rude of you. But it never actually happened. She had a party. We don't know. It's just a hypothetical person. You didn't skip any party. It's all bullshit. Except it's not bullshit. It's true for the purpose of this example because we need to establish for this example a status of either truth or false. See what I'm saying?
Well, what if within a conversation you have to establish, like you can't agree on the truth value of a statement, so then you turn to science to answer the question of whether or not something's true?
Okay, so that happens a lot. In other words, people get stuck arguing about whether a given element of a larger conversation is true or false, and then they'll try to resolve it with well, science backs me or whatever. But the fact is, almost never is that determinant of anything that matters. Because if the science is really in consensus about it, then the person you're arguing with is either unaware of this for some reason, or is choosing to try to claim, say, okay, let's assume X is true, and you go, but that was disproven years ago. You go, well, let's assume that vaccinations cause autism. Okay, because we're going to talk about why vaccinations are bad. Now, your position is a certain amount of autism is worth it to prevent the disease. My position is no. Autism is so bad that we shouldn't have vaccinations, even if they do prevent disease. So let's go ahead and argue. I'm insisting you argue under my framework that we agree it causes autism, and we're supposed to be arguing about what's more important. Should we prevent the autism or should we prevent the disease? And I'm trying to convince you that you have to argue under this framework with me, right?
Yeah.
Now you're going to say, but that assumption there is not, I do not accept for the purpose of this conversation that it causes autism. I dispute that assumption. And so you're going to say, and here's why, here's some data. Note, though, that in that conversation, the person is saying, I don't like vaccination. And you're saying, okay, well, why not? And they're saying, well, because of this bullshit. And you go, well, that's bullshit. And here's some evidence as to why I think it's bullshit. Well, does it cause autism? No. But do we know that because of science? I mean, I know that because I and everybody I know has been vaccinated and none of us are autistic. It doesn't cause it, that's for sure. If there is any sort of correlation, it would have to be extraordinarily weak. And it's obvious. We don't need science to know that.
Yeah.
So the point being, even if you do successfully point out that if we are to determine the truth value of that one particular claim, then we could best determine it by pointing to physical world data. You're correct. Now that physical world data could be something done by the University of California science team with their lab coats and their beakers. They're here to do some science. Or it could be me pointing out that I and everybody I know has been vaccinated and none of us are autistic.
But what about
I'm also pointing out physical data. It's just as effective and and probably more convincing than science.
what if you're asking something more specific than that? Like, I don't know, like about climate change or something like that, and you bring up like scientific discoveries about like ice cores and stuff like that, which is not like obvious.
Okay, sure. Climate change is a perfect example. We can throw a whole bunch of evidence around about climate change. Or I could point out, but we don't know if it's a linear curve or not, and make the whole discussion moot. So in other words, we can agree that carbon in the atmosphere has caused temperatures to rise. But what we don't know is the relationship between the addition of carbon into the atmosphere and the curve of change. So if it's like this, then we keep adding more carbon, it keeps getting hotter. If it's like this, then we can keep adding carbon now, it's not going to do anything else. If it's like this, then we better not add any more carbon because we're about to reach critical mass, or critical velocity, or escape velocity, or whatever you want to call it, for runaway greenhouse. We don't know the shape of the curve. We can't know the shape of the curve until we deduce it from experiential phenomena, whether they are artificially produced in the lab or whether they are observed by humans in the world. It doesn't matter which. Science is not predominant here because ideation always wins. If you can't tell me the shape of the curve, you can't tell me anything meaningful about what we ought to do. Now, if you're saying it's anthropogenic, of course it is.
The lab is like part of the world, though. It's just that you're taking objects from the outside world and observing them in the lab.
The lab is distinct only insofar as it attempts to eliminate some variables in order to better attain a relative absolute. Science says if we control for this, then, and we do this, then we can reliably predict outcomes this and this. But in the first section, controlling for all those variables means, remember, this is in under lab environment. It's not real world environment, which when they say that kind of shit, what that means is, remember, there are way more variables in play in reality than in the reality we constructed in the lab as a representation of reality. So
okay, what about like this argument? What if someone is arguing like for the facts of the Bible and saying that the world is like 6,000 years old, but it's obviously not due to observational data?
Well, I'd say, okay, so you say you believe the world is 6,000 years old. My point to you would be, you're making that claim. What am I supposed to do with it? Why are you making that claim that it's 6,000 years old? What am I supposed to do with that information? That's what I would ask. And what does that tell you? Like, why does that matter how old the Earth is? First of all, because you don't get to present to me. You can present to me random claims all day long, but unless you tell me unless I know what you're doing with your claims, unless you're doing something with them, then they're just sounds in the air.
Yeah, actually, it would normally be the other way around. The objection would be the world is not 6,000 years old, and that therefore shows the inconsistency of the Bible.
Okay, so I would ask somebody who says the world is not 6,000 years old. Somebody says, and I say, okay, well, why are you telling me that? And the person says, well, to show that what the Bible says is inconsistent with our data. And I'd say, okay, so why do you think the Bible is supposed to be a description of the status quo understanding of planetary age? And you'd say, well, it's because the Bible is true and it says blah blah blah. Well, you're saying that statement has a truth value of true? So are you claiming it has a truth value of true because we can't actually have a descriptive referent in physical reality per se, because the age of something isn't a phenomenon. But we can, I suppose, ask if it's valid within a given system that prioritizes these observational data points to deduce these kind of conclusions. Then that system, is it valid or not? It's invalid. The conclusion has been derived invalidly within that system. If you've drawn that conclusion, you've derived it invalidly if you're using science or if you're using observational data or whatever. Now, from what I can tell, ma'am, with your Bible reading, I'm talking to Sandra here. Sandra's a real lover of the Bible. And I can tell, ma'am, with your Bible reading that you are gauging the age of the earth by the words of the Bible instead, correct? Okay, so it sounds to me as though within your frame of of evaluatory metrics, then the Earth is 6,000 years old, and within this other frame of evaluatory metrics, the Earth is much older than that. Because like, nope, yours is wrong, and you'll go within the evaluatory metrics of your frame of reference. That's true. My evaluatory frame of reference has a status of wrong.
Okay.
The problem is people use arguments to do things. That's the thing. Is that if the person is making an argument to do something, then all of a sudden you've got a much more interesting conversation happening. If they're saying, you're 6,000 years old, and that's why we should kill all the Mexicans. Okay, now you're talking about an argument you can have because they're advocating a course of action. They're advocating that we do something, or that you do something, or that something not be done, or something like that. They're trying to influence. Once people try to influence others to take courses of action or ascribe to positions and stuff, then the conversation becomes real. Prior to that, it's all hypothetical. If the person is talking about how old the Earth is, 6,000 years old, and the person talking about the Earth being 3 billion years old or whatever, are both correct within their respective framework. The conversation will never happen between them about which framework they prefer.
People do take the framework of the Bible or religion and then take actions based on that. And that's a argument that comes up because people say, like, science is a better framework for understanding reality than religion is. But we were talking about, like, you're saying in the lab, scientists try to, like, eliminate as many variables as they can in order to say, like, okay, this phenomenon that we observed was caused by this other phenomenon. And are you saying that, like, we can't ultimately, like, eliminate enough variables to call it true?
Well, what I'm saying is that
or like
it doesn't operate on that scale. It operates on a scale. Look, normally if you're talking about impact calculus, for example, in debate, you're talking about magnitude, probability, and time frame. So in life, when we're talking policy advocacies, people talk about we, the government or the Congress or something, should pass law X. And the reason is because it's going to have the following impacts. And impact calculus tells us that we can know which course of action to prefer by evaluating the probability of the impact happening, the magnitude of the impact happening, and the time frame within which it happens. So if I say we have to devote all of our resources to climate change because I have a good argument here that if dramatic changes don't happen, that within 200 years the planet will be unlivable or something. Okay, that's fine. But even if you do have a good idea now, we don't really have a reason to believe that taking substantial action now, when we don't have any truly good solution, is going to be better than taking action later when a good solution presents itself, number one. Number two, while we may have agreement that climate change exists and is anthropogenic, that is caused by human behavior, we don't know the impact of how that same human behavior persisting over time will impact whether it will impact the environment at an increasing rate, a decreasing rate, or the same rate. And number three, we don't have any alternative means to sustain the level of productivity that we've attained as a species. Now, productivity, I simply mean the ability, in this instance, shouldn't use the word productivity. I mean the ability of individuals to use the resources of the world in the way that they want, to live the way that they want. It is critical for all solutions. It's the engine of our prosperity, is the empowerment of the individual towards autonomously manifesting themselves in reality as they wish. And when that happens, global problems get solved because they have their own, they demand. It's like there's an economy with it. The more significantly a problem needs a solution, the more attention people give to it. And the more that solving a problem produces rewards for an individual, the more motivated that individual is, assuming they're intrinsic rewards, to attend to that thing. So if we're in a state where there's a big problem right now, but we don't have a clear, good solution to something, the best thing to do is nothing. And it's a huge mistake of humanity to try half measures to get, well, we have to do something. We need to make some sort of improvement. This will help a little bit. It's a bad idea for public policy. Now, within your own life, incremental change is the only way anything happens. In a public policy thing, either something has genuine binary solvency or it ought never be done, because the unintended consequences of public policy vastly outweigh the impacts of the intended consequences and are vastly underweighted by everybody. And that's what makes it such a dangerous modality.
Well, okay. So for one, you raised some questions that could be answered by science, such as like, what's a viable solution to our problem? Well, we could, like, through science, discover something that allows us to create some sort of technology, in like physics or something like that. And also the question of how likely it is that it'll keep increasing the climate at the same rate. That's not just a matter of like, what's the climate doing? Like, how is it going up? You can predict this based on certain factors that you can observe in the natural world. And also,
how
about
strong
what you
is the
said
prediction?
about
How strong is the question, though, is always going to be, how strong is your prediction and what's it based on? Is the thing you're predicting, does it function like that? Different systems within themselves have different functional approaches.
I mean, yes, that's true, but it is relevant to try to like reach some sort of answer, to like try to present the evidence.
So fine. What you're saying is it is relevant to resolve those nodes, that we should go through each nodes and determine what actually is. I want this thing to be determined one way or another. This is a fact that we are all going to agree is true. Nobody's going to dispute, so that we can argue from that point. That's why we want to lock shit down. And it is true that if we want to lock shit down in ways that are least, that are strongest, or best usable for us within our argumentation, then we have data, and we have, like, for example, when I argue in favor of race, when I said race isn't real, race is bullshit. The first time I went that line of argumentation and tried to explain to everybody there's no such thing as race, I got a lot of pushback. Recently, I revisited the topic, and this time, instead of just telling people what I thought about it, I researched it a little bit, and I read some shit out loud. And it wasn't because what I read out loud was put more correctly or better or more convincingly than what I said, but the fact that it was from somebody who people perceived to be a scholar with legitimacy beyond mine, then they accepted what I had to say because it was not sourced from me. People have much less respect if I say, well, it's because why do you think that, Eric? Or where did you get that from? Well, I came up with it, or I made it up. Now, they'll be much less likely to believe it or think it's worth taking seriously than if I say, oh, I was reading these scholars in the field, and this is what this is what they say. Well, according to blah, 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 this is the case. People will take it much more seriously than if I go, well, I made this up yesterday, but most of what I say, I made up yesterday. And most of what I say is right, and it's right for reasons that are more right than these so-called experts. And I know this because as a debate coach, I'm the meta-scientist. In other words, your science is always noted out, whatever science it is, whether it's love, whether it's science, whether it's whatever, is always noted out beneath my framework because I understand all of this shit as how they function discursively, which is the only way they ever function. Science doesn't exist except insofar as you're using it for some sort of argumentation. It doesn't have any other purpose except profit, and then it's individual interest that drives science. not anything else.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not really arguing that science supersedes philosophy or anything like that. I'm just arguing that it's a valid approach to answering questions that arise in philosophical discussion.
Sure. It's a valid, it's absolutely, I wouldn't call it a valid approach, I call it a legitimate approach. I think people use the word valid too loosely. Valid means it's legal within the rules of a system. In particular, with logic, in other words, this conclusion is legally, deductively necessary within the rules of this system, means something's valid. And you can determine validity by replacing whatever is being said with letters. So if I'm saying, if Jill and or Sue go to the store without Bobby, then Mary will be really upset and will throw Tom's favorite vase out the window. Blah, blah, blah. See all that shit. If I want to test the validity of it, I can forget about all the details and replace each of those statements with a letter, and put the statement connectives, if, then, and, or, if and only if, not. I can put those statement connectives and modifiers, things, or whatever you call them, into a line of code, what it looks like code, P, horseshoe, Q, with parentheses around it. It looks like math, but it's not math. It's a representation of the logical expression of a set of words rather than the meaning expression. It's not concerned about the diction or the definitional concerns. It's concerned about the structural, the underlying structure of what's being said.
All right, I can agree with that. Yes, I mean.
So legitimate, in my debate class, I'll teach you the following definition. Legitimate means right, good, or true. And so
But I think that often in society people ignore scientific data, even though it is like the best, or it is the
yes, there are people who offend you with their bad TI. There are people who offended me with their bad TI too. I get it. But we should note that it's never a good idea to try to divide the world into teams like that and say, I don't like these non-rational people with their stupid blah, 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 blah. It is a good idea to say there's a lot of bad discourse out there that fails to account for framing at all. It just doesn't even account for framing at all. That says, like, well, here's an example of something you might hear from a Bernie Sanders speech or something. This country is too great to allow some of our people to have no way of taking their talents and making their dreams a reality. There will be free college for everyone. Now, the thing about that is, what the problem there is not anything he's saying. It's not the free college, not that. It's the fact that he's not talking about framework. He's not saying, okay, here's an advocacy I'm going to make. It's an advocacy about spending public money. It either assumes that we're going to read about public money that exists from something else to pay for this, or we're going to have to increase taxes to do this. The burden will be on a taxpayer. It also makes a bunch of other assumptions. And so it's like the reason Bernie Sanders had that plan is because he did not come up with the idea from an introverted thinking perspective. He came up with the idea from either an introverted feeling or an extroverted feeling perspective, which is to say he understood it would play well if it's extroverted feeling. He understood that it would make people like him, it would make people vote for him, or he believed it so strongly in the unique worthwhileness of each individual person that he felt that helping those people with his idea was more important than whether his idea would actually help. In other words, that the good intentions outweighed the realities of the situation. So either way, what he didn't do is think about framework at all. He didn't think about it at all. He didn't say, here's why I advocate for this, and here's other reasons why I might advocate for this, and here's reasons why one might advocate against this, and here are the frames that each of these parties might use, and this is why this is the strongest case and the strongest approach. He didn't analyze it from a discursive interaction perspective, because as a politician, he doesn't have to interact. He doesn't actually have to defend his ideas. Nobody's really challenging him. They're asking him what his ideas are. They're not saying, but here's a preferable alternative. Why? Let's argue it out. They're just saying he's being presented as a complete product. Like, I've already done all the ideation policy work, so here's my plan. Well, when I run for president, which I'm definitely going to do, I'm going to come out there and say, I have ideated some of these things out to the nth degree, and some of these things are ideationally in process. I don't want you to just be asking me what I plan to do, although I'd be happy to do so. I want you to tell me why you think what I'm doing is wrong. And I want you to hear my response, and I want you to be responsive to that. Now, that's the key thing. I want you to tell me I'm wrong when I'm wrong. But when I explain to you why, no, you're wrong, and you need to respond to what I say. This is the problem that people have. They are non-responsive. If they go, I think it'd be a good idea for us to put another dollar tax on cigarettes and pay for a new park in our community. And I say, okay, but number one, why should only a small portion of the community pay for a park that the whole community will use? And the person says, it's just this is a great way for us to fund a park, and everyone will benefit, and they just ignore what I say. And I say, okay, but no, answer my question though. Are you concerned that only a small portion of the community is paying for a park that everyone's going to use? And they just ignore my warrant. My warrant is that's not consistent with our understandings of how communities ought to fund their own shit, right? But they're refusing to address that because they don't like it because they're attached to their conclusion. Now, that is the cancer that plagues humanity. Non-responsiveness. Individuals being allowed to not respond on point. Cops being allowed to not answer questions about shit. Prosecutors being allowed to limit the scope of argumentation in a courtroom such that they don't ever have to address their own malfeasance. It's ISIS saying, well, the reason I don't have to answer your questions is because I'm going to shoot you. And you're a heathen. The reason I don't have to defend my position by being right, by using words well, is because I'm a fucking retard and I can't defend my position at all. And it is the whole of humanity's problems is the resistance, the ability of individuals to avoid answering on point. It should be the greatest, most shameful action any human being can do is to refuse to answer on point. To say I'm not answering questions, or I'm being anonymous, or I'm making a claim to privacy, or I'm just going to ignore you, or I'm going to answer as though you asked something else, or whatever. Not being accountable for their positions is a travesty that fucking appalls me. And whenever anybody does that, and they ignore me, and they're just fouling up the rhetorical river, I just want to shit on their head and bury it in the sand and say, if you want to bury it in the sand, you're going to bury your head in the sand with shit on it. So I get your frustration. Believe me, I understand that the world is filled with people who say stupid ass shit that annoys me. I went on a date one time with an ENFP. I took her out to this farm-to-table restaurant in the boutique area of Glendale, a place that is itself a small business and is benefiting from the fact that some other small business owners are successful enough with capitalism to take this retarded chick out to dinner. we're sitting there, and like the first thing she says, she starts in on is about how capitalism is bad. I'm looking around thinking, does this bitch? Yes, I'd like the marbled ribeye, please. Anyway, capitalism is terrible. Is this bitch for real? And so I said, but do you know what wealth is? Or where does money? Where do you think wealth comes from? The government. Well, no, they issue money, but that's not where the wealth comes from, right? But what do you think it is? Well, wealth is what happens when labor is applied to a resource. Well, that's like a communist definition. That's good. And she was like happy about that. I'm like, no, it's not like a communist definition. It is why individuals own the output of their own labor. And you know, it flared up into a fight for about 3 minutes at the very beginning of the day. And I was like, you know what? I don't even want to fight with you. Let's just sit down. And we had a kind of tense but not unpleasant rest of the dinner. I paid for her meal with my capitalist plunder, and I never saw her again. Good riddance to the bitch. I can't stand that shit. Why are you having strong opinions about public policy, which impacts everybody, what others ought to do, when you refuse to actually engage rhetorically about something? You're making powerful arguments about what we ought to do with wealth, and you have no idea what it is.
Well, what about this? To your point that that's what plagues humanity, what if there's a situation in which someone's TI is stronger than the person they're arguing against, but the TI argument they're making is not as strong as a possible TI argument for the argument someone else is making, the other person?
Call host Eric.
Okay.
It's that simple. That's why I'm here. It's what I'm doing. It's like my purpose in life. I am going around dismantling bullshit and advocating passionately in favor of a discursive understanding of reality that acknowledges the real way in which our words actually interact with each other. We need to stop mistaking the map for the territory.
I like it. That's good.
Thank you. You're a nice guy. I like you. You're an INTP for sure. I mean, you act. Are you? Do you self-identify as an INTP? Who are you?
Whenever I take the test, I usually get 50-50 on thinking feeling, but yeah, INTP, INFP, I'm not really sure.
You are not an INFP. You are not an INFP. You are an INTP. And I don't. Yeah. I can tell. I've dealt with enough INTPs. You came in with the same kind of like you're tired of encountering irrationality, and you prefer rationality, and the only kind of understanding of rationality that heretofore you've really encountered and dealt with is one that is focused on empirics heavily. And so, you know, INTPs gravitate towards the primacy of empirics because it's the only kind of rationality that's proved really stable to hold on to in a sea of people and their chaotic feelings that we all go through. But what I'm here to say is there is another understanding of rationality that is preferable, that puts empirics where it ought to be, which is a friend in the service of discursive meta discourse, which ultimately is the means by which meta rationality is attained. And meta rationality is it's really a state of being. Unlike almost everything else I talk about, it's not. While you can say it expresses in the moment or doesn't, meta rationality is the state of the individual who's expressing. It's you either are beyond attachment to positions or you're not.
Check chat, Derek.
Check chat. I'm going to check the chat with my chat friend. Check and chat with Chet. I'm going to check that chat and see what Chet says, where his chat is at. Why is he not an INFP? Please explain. I'm going to explain right now if you want to hear me with your brain. It's because he prioritizes empirics over feelings, and he's concerned about all the stupid people out there annoying him with their bullshit.
Well, how about this? What if I were to tell you that I like Bernie Sanders?
Makes perfect sense. Susie's a socialist too. She's a class guy to be.
Surveys.
The reason it makes perfect sense is because you're comparing Bernie Sanders to alternatives in the status quo or alternatives. You're saying you bought into the framework that says I ought to embrace a politician on the grounds that he's well-intentioned and seems like he wants to take his job seriously. In other words, you're judging it by the person, not by the actual policies.
Yeah.
There's no way there's no way to back any major candidate from any party in any election ever if you're evaluating them on what they actually think, for any reason.
That makes sense. I mean, main reason I go for him is because he was the only one really serious about getting capitalist interest out of the political process, like getting business interests and stuff like that out of it. I think that's the main issue, I guess, because it's a logical inconsistency.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The problem with government is rarely that. It is sometimes that. It's like business interests corrupting the process. But that's not generally the problem. The problem is that it empowers some people to impose some visions upon all people without adhering to the limits or constraints that it ought to, which are simple constraints of natural law, namely a rights-based framework. So since it doesn't constrain itself to its proper role by adherence to a principled framework like a rights-based framework, which, albeit approximate, is as close to a valid, as close to a true system as well as valid as we can get with normative stuff for policy issues. We've got to first of all define, rights and transgressions very clearly so that we understand much of what the government is doing is transgressive and therefore not permissible. Look, here's some definitions everybody should know. Wealth, that which happens when labor is applied to a resource. A right, that which confers a duty upon another. So if I have a right, it confers a duty upon somebody else. A positive right, often called an entitlement, is a right that is attained contractually. It's usually between two interested parties. So if I go through McDonald's and order and pay for Big Mac, if I go to McDonald's and pay for a Big Mac, I then have a positive right to a Big Mac. They have to give me one because it's contractually attained positive right. I'm entitled to a Big Mac. A negative right is a right that confers a duty of non-interference upon all other people. So while I don't have a right to a Big Mac unless I pay for one, I have a right not to get stabbed by you or anybody else. And it is a natural right, which is to say it's implied by my existence as an agent that is also an object. Because objects, as a general rule, can be owned. They're either they're unowned and can be taken ownership of. Humanity, though, human beings can. So, in other words, we either have natural rights or we accept slavery as a legitimate phenomenon. So, given that most people don't want to accept slavery as a legitimate phenomenon, then it's necessarily the case that you're born owning your own body, unless you want to say that your parents own it. But if that's the case, then this is obviously not the case because it's inconsistent with what we know reality functions like.
What about this? I want to argue for universal basic income because part of your personal health is having access to food and having access to, I don't know, just basic necessities of living and thinking.
But do you have a right to food?
You need that to maintain your physical being, which you're saying that you You have a right
right,
to not be
but
taught. So why?
a right is that which confers a duty upon another. Do you have a right to food? If you choose not to eat anything for weeks and weeks and weeks and you die of starvation, who's your murderer?
Well,
You don't have a right to food because positive rights to things, are contractually attained. You might try to argue that the social contract, which I'll get to in a second.
What about an entitlement to food?
Okay, well, sure, you may have an entitlement to food, but that entitlement to food is one that would be contractually attained, but the way to argue that would be to use what's so-called social contract theory. Social contract theory says because we are born into a society, we give up certain rights in exchange for certain protections and guarantees of systems and stuff like that. But the problem with social contract theory is a contract definitionally is that which was freely entered into consensually by two or more parties who are fully informed.
Wait. Then, since you said that a right is something that you like must have, what's the right to bear arms?
I didn't say that. What did I say a right was? That which confers a duty upon another. A right is that which confers a duty upon another.
Then what's the right to bear arms? What duty are?
That's a negative right. A negative right is that which confers a duty upon all others to not interfere. Non-interference. Okay. So the right to bear arms in the U.S. Constitution is an attempt by the founding fathers to codify into clear language that which they also concurrently believed ought not need be codified, namely that the government has no reason to interfere with you as an individual owning a firearm and ought not do so because it's not legitimate use of government force. Remember, government is best defined as that which has a monopoly on use of force.
Since we live in a capitalist system in which all food is commodified, then therefore our right to have produce.
Food isn't commodified. It's a commodity.
I mean, there's really no way if I live in a city for me to go and get food other than to go buy a commodity or maybe like eat a squirrel.
Okay. So it's true that in the status quo, in reality, people have to do things to get food. That's true.
Yes. I mean, and so the whole political and social structure that I'm born into could be said to be infringing upon or just affecting my right to seek food.
What? Okay, you don't have a right to seek food except insofar as you have the negative right to non-interference. A right is that which confers a duty upon another. If you have a right to seek food, whose duty is it to do anything? There's no duty there. The duty is they have the duty not to interfere with you. So
the entire like industrial structure has affected the environment and affected the way that ecosystems are dispersed throughout the world, and we're born into having to produce an income for ourselves to acquire food instead of just being able to hunt.
Okay, what do you think hunting is? It's work, same as
I mean, it is work.
Same as going.
It is work, but it's not being affected by any other like structure. It's just like work within the
affected by other structures. It's affected by how many other hunters there are in the forest, what kind of forest it is, how many animals there are, the population density of the kind of animals you like to eat versus those that you don't, your ability to trade those animals to other people for different animals if you get sick of them or whatever. Of course, it's impacted by all those things. It's the same thing. People want to talk about capitalism and corporations and business interests as though they were monolithic or had some identity. They do not. Capitalism is simply the absence of use of force to stop people from from behaving consensually in ways that they feel like as individual agents. The only thing that, if you say, "Oh, look, I sold this T-shirt to somebody in England, it's a Talking Famous People shirt, and they paid me by the internet, and I sent it to them," that is not a example of capitalism. That's the example. It is, but what it really is, hey, look, we are free enough that nobody shoved a gun in my face and tried to steal the T-shirt or steal the money that the person was trying to give me for the T-shirt. Capitalism is the absence of crime. Capitalism is the absence of use of force when people who are not entitled to anything because they did none of the labor that generated any of the wealth try to plunder that wealth from the individual who generated it. When that occurs, it's crime. Or when it occurs in ways that have been legitimized because of the need for somebody to be in charge of the guns, then we call it government.
Okay.
Give me more on your socialist nonsense. This is fun. Susie, the socialist.
I don't really have anything to say. I was kind of destroyed there.
Listen,
it's going to take me a while to do anything.
What I have to say to you about it is, it's excellent that you're talking to me about these things, and if you hear me and listen, cop all these arguments. You'll discover that really what you want to do is be the one who's perceived as smartest about this shit. It doesn't really matter what your position is, and it's better to position yourself along the strongest argumentation chain. That means what I'm saying. Understand the definition of wealth. It's that which happens when an individual's labor is directed towards a resource. Who owns the resource determines how much of the wealth from the labor the individual may get. So in other words, a lot of the labor we do is not directed towards our own resources. Right now, I'm doing labor on my resource. So the dividends I get are mostly going to be mine. I actually share ownership of this. Susie has some ownership of it, and so does Taylor. But the majority of it is mine. And so when I direct labor towards this resource, then I get most of the profits myself to the extent that it has any. Now, the amount of wealth that this labor is generating is very small directly. But if I do a lot of individual instances of these, each individual instance becomes more valuable. It's also long tail profitable. So any given piece of work that I produce on Talking Famous People has potential to maybe make me 1 cent a year from now. But if you have enough things up there, then that long tail stuff starts to add up as well. There's a lot of reasons why directing labor to this resource for me is a good idea, but fundamentally why I do it is because it's my favorite fun thing to do. Otherwise I wouldn't do it for shit. I'm just that kind of fucking selfish. I'm super ADHD. So I got a fidget spinner. I got one on my fingers. I got one attached to my nose, and I got one you can't see on my anus. I got a really wide butt cheek split part, so I can fit one of these. My cheeks are like this. The cheek comes here and here, and so there's a big space here, and my anus sticks out just a little bit. I can attach this to it and spin it all around like this. It's happening right now. It's spinning right now. You can't see it, but most people can't do that. That's what makes me special. That's why I have a YouTube channel.
Or broken.
What's broken?
That just sounds damaged. Oh.
So yeah, look, homie, you seem like you're probably a 19 to 23-year-old INTP male who's frustrated by the state of the world. My advice to you, sir, learn these arguments. You'll have a lot more fun with them. Know the definition of wealth. Right, that which confers a duty upon another. Negative right confers a duty of non-interference. Positive right is contractually attained. It's also called an entitlement. Understand that use of force, monopoly on legitimate use of force is the definition of government, and that justice requires a evaluation of property rights. First and foremost, everything collapses down to property rights. Without an adjudication of property rights, we can never have any answer of question of fairness or justice. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to something for everybody on this video when I push yes, put it out there for everyone to see. It's going to be a link to a a thing I use in debate. It's called Badass Rights article. I didn't write it, but I highlighted it. And you guys will get to see it, and it's such a good article. That's why I call it Badass Rights article. Let's see where it is. Bad ass. There it is. You can see it's a .doc. That means you can look at it with your Microsoft word processing program. That would be a good way to do it. And you could also look at it by clicking the link that's going to appear here. If you're here right now, it's going to be a cow. Or if you're at home viewing from the comfort of your own bathroom, then you can get it when it publishes, which I'll put it here. And I know what I'll do. I'll go to live dashboard. Live dashboard. 2 hours and 10 minutes. Wow. What a live dashboard. I'm going to say something. If you're one of these 7 people who've been watching, I hope you've been watching the whole 2 hours and 10 minutes. Because if not, you missed the best part. And then I'm going to put some poop in my pants and rub it around. Oh, right. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it in the meow. Here's the thing. I'm going to say, here's the thing. I was saying that stuff about.
Play with your fidget shitter.
Yeah, I'm playing with my fidget shitter. Gonna be a fidget sitter. People hire me to babysit their fidget spinners. Okay, so I think that's about going to bring us to a close, but I will take a 10-minute wind down time here for you guys to muse back at me more than I monopolize the shit out of this, but and also smoke some bowls. Go ahead. Anybody thoughts?
Muse back at you. Do you think anyone actually listened for the whole thing?
Well, I hope so. It was nonstop gold brick after gold brick. If you spent the entire 2 hours and 10 minutes listening attentively, you have got yourself Fort Knox right now.
Okay. What's your name, new person?
My name's Garrett.
Oh, you're Garrett. Oh, congratulations, by the way. You are the smartest consumer. You got the one and only ultra cheap. Every time somebody buys it, I'm going to double the price. You got the first one. You got the cheapest one there ever will be. You got the cheapest one there ever will be. So, let's,
See, I'm learning. I know capitalism now.
Do you have a Facebook page, Capitalist?
Yes, I actually messaged you during the video. I couldn't figure out how to get on here, but then I did.
Good.
So, worked out.
Good job figuring it out. Okay, so I will let's look at the messages. It says I need to accept you as a friend, probably, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, yeah, there it is. I see. I got you. Cool. All right, well, goodbye, everybody. Who are these people? This person also wants me to be their friend. Cool. I like it when people add me as their friends. Kimberly sent me something. Tracy sent me a thumbs up. Cool. That's an important message. And also, you guys don't need to see all my Facebook shit. I used to get in trouble for that. Now I got nothing to hide, so whatever. When I was in a previous relationship, I always had to be super careful about, because it was a little on the DL, this relationship. But anyway, I had to be super careful about remembering not to show my screen, because my Facebook was full of both stuff that's supposed to be secret or something. I can't hate that.
You managed to pick it up.
What's that?
You still managed to get stuff on your screen which shouldn't be there, but that's a long time ago now.
Oh, yeah, well, there's that too. But, everybody needs a little time away. Okay, so
like the one you never published.
What's that?
like the one you never published with Nick,
Did
where
I
you
not-
talked about probably the same person, I believe.
Is it up there? Is it unpublished still? And I mean to go through those and just, if it's good enough, publish it. If you ever feel like doing that, if I put something up there that's not published and you think it's good enough to publish, it just means I haven't gotten to deciding if I like it enough. But I mean, so if you think like that should definitely go, then just publish it.
Well, but what if you say this shouldn't be published and I think it's funny?
Hold off on that one. There's a limit to my transparency sometimes. If somebody else is going to get mad at me, then that's where my limit usually is. No, I don't want to talk about that because Garrett's going to be furious if I talk about that. Then that would be a different thing. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, all right, goodbye everybody. Thanks for watching people. This is a very long live stream and a very pleasant monologation. And Garrett, I will be messaging you today. Okay, thank you. Bye.